Keanu Reeves quietly steps onto the first-class flight, dressed in his usual low-key style, a black t-shirt, worn jeans, and a leather backpack slung over one shoulder. He moves with a relaxed, unassuming presence, greeting the flight attendants with a polite nod before settling into his seat by the window. Across the aisle, a wealthy businessman notices him and instantly forms an opinion. The man is in his late 50s, wearing a tailored navy blue suit, a designer tie, and an expensive gold watch that glints under the cabin lights. His attitude screams superiority. As Keanu calmly places his backpack beneath his seat and pulls out a book, the businessman smirks and leans toward him. "Didn't know economy class had a lottery," he quips loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. A couple of them chuckle, though some shift uncomfortably, sensing the unnecessary rudeness. Keanu looks up briefly, his face calm, then simply returns to his book without a reaction. The businessman, emboldened by what he perceives as silent embarrassment, continues. "You sure you're in the right seat? First class is for people who actually belong here." His voice carries a hint of amusement, but underneath it is the clear implication that Keanu doesn't seem worthy of the luxury around him. A flight attendant walks by, and the businessman snaps his fingers to get her attention. "Excuse me, miss, can you double-check his ticket? I'd hate for someone to be misplaced." Before the attendant can respond, Keanu looks up, offering a slight smile. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." His voice is calm, devoid of anger or ego. The attendant, recognizing Keanu, smiles respectfully and replies, "Yes, sir, Mr. Reeves is in the correct seat." The businessman blinks at the mention of his last name but dismisses it, assuming it's just a coincidence. He waves off the flight attendant dismissively and leans back, rolling his eyes. As the plane doors close and the flight prepares for takeoff, Keanu remains unbothered, continuing to read. The businessman, however, is about to learn a lesson he will never forget. The plane taxis down the runway, and soon, the engines roar as it lifts into the sky. Keanu remains calm, flipping through the pages of his book, completely unfazed by the businessman's earlier remarks. His composure only seems to irritate the man further. The businessman, still reveling in his own arrogance, orders a glass of the most expensive champagne available. When the flight attendant brings it, he takes a sip and leans back in his seat, glancing at Keanu again. "You must really be enjoying this, huh? First class is a whole different world from what you're used to, I bet." Keanu doesn't react, simply offering a small, polite smile before turning another page. The businessman, expecting some sort of defensive response, narrows his eyes. Why wasn't this guy taking the bait? A few minutes later, a flight attendant approaches Keanu with a warm smile. "Mr. Reeves, we're honored to have you aboard. Please let us know if you need anything." The businessman's smirk falters. "Mr. Reeves," he mutters under his breath, repeating the name as if trying to place it. Keanu nods at the flight attendant, offering a grateful but humble response. "Thank you, I appreciate it." The businessman watches the exchange, his mind racing. Something about the name feels strangely familiar. He shifts uncomfortably, suddenly unsure of himself. His curiosity gets the better of him, and he discreetly glances around. A few passengers are now whispering among themselves, some even sneaking quick photos of Keanu. Then, a younger passenger beside him leans over and whispers, "You really don't know who that is?" The businessman shakes his head. The young man chuckles in disbelief. "That's Keanu Reeves, one of the biggest actors in the world. Not just famous, he's respected. And crazy rich, by the way." The businessman's stomach tightens. Keanu Reeves. The name suddenly clicks, and flashes of action movies, headlines about his generosity, and stories of his humility flood his mind. He had spent the last hour insulting one of the most admired and wealthiest actors in the world, assuming he was beneath him. A wave of regret washes over him as he realizes his mistake. The businessman shifts uncomfortably in his seat, replaying his earlier comments in his mind. Did I really just mock Keanu Reeves? His face grows warm with embarrassment. Across the aisle, a few passengers approach Keanu, smiling excitedly. "Mr. Reeves, we're huge fans. Would you mind taking a picture with us?" Keanu, ever humble, sets down his book and offers a genuine smile. "Of course." He takes the time to chat with them briefly before posing for a couple of photos. The businessman watches in disbelief. Why were people acting like he was some kind of royalty? Then, the younger passenger beside him smirks and leans in again. Dude, you really didn't know. Keanu Reeves isn't just a movie star, he's a legend. He's worth hundreds of millions but still lives like a normal guy. Rides the subway, donates most of his money to charity. The guy is basically a saint. The businessman's throat tightens. Hundreds of millions. Charitable. Rides the subway. This was the man he had mocked for not belonging in first class. As the realization hits him like a freight train, he suddenly feels small. All his material wealth, his designer suit, his expensive watch, his overpriced champagne, none of it made him more valuable than the man he had insulted. Trying to salvage his pride, he clears his throat and forces out a chuckle. Well, I guess I didn't recognize him in such casual clothes. The younger passenger scoffs. Yeah, that's kind of the point. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. The businessman falls silent, staring at Keanu as he interacts with the passengers around him. Keanu isn't demanding attention. He isn't acting superior. In fact, he treats everyone, from the flight attendants to the fans, with the same quiet respect. And that's when it truly sinks in. He had been looking at wealth the wrong way. True wealth wasn't about expensive suits, flashy watches, or first-class privileges. It was about character, humility, and the impact you have on others. And Keanu Reeves had just taught him that, without saying a single word. The businessman sits frozen in his seat, his mind replaying the condescending remarks he had made to Keanu just moments ago. First class is for people who actually belong here. The words now feel poisonous in his memory. He steals another glance at Keanu, who has gone back to reading his book, completely unfazed. There's no anger, no resentment, just calmness. The businessman almost wishes Keanu had reacted, had snapped back, had put him in his place. But he hadn't, and that made it worse. The businessman's fingers tighten around the stem of his champagne glass. He had spent his life climbing the corporate ladder, accumulating wealth, status, and the validation of luxury. He thought money had given him superiority. But here was Keanu Reeves, richer than him, more famous than him, more respected than him, yet carrying himself with complete humility. The businessman exhales slowly. He realizes now that money hadn't made him powerful, it had made him arrogant. And the true mark of power wasn't wealth, but how one treated others. A flight attendant walks by, and the businessman suddenly feels ashamed of how he had snapped his fingers at her earlier. He watches how Keanu treats her, acknowledging her, thanking her, treating her like an equal. He clenches his jaw. I've been doing it all wrong. Determined to make things right, he takes a deep breath and turns to face Keanu. Mr. Reeves, he says, his voice quieter now, lacking the arrogance from before. Keanu looks up, raising a polite eyebrow. Yes. The businessman hesitates, suddenly feeling like a schoolboy about to apologize to his teacher. But he swallows his pride and says, I owe you an apology. I judged you without knowing who you were. That was ignorant of me. Keanu studies him for a moment. Then, in his usual calm demeanor, he gives a small nod. It takes character to admit that. Apology accepted. The businessman didn't deserve such an easy forgiveness, but Keanu gave it anyway. And for the first time in his life, the businessman realizes that true greatness isn't about wealth or status. It's about how one carries themselves, even in the face of disrespect. The businessman sits back in his seat, processing Keanu's words. The forgiveness had come so easily, so effortlessly, as if Keanu had expected nothing in return. For a man who had spent his life believing power came from dominance and status, this was a revelation. Keanu returns to his book, unbothered, as if the entire exchange never happened. The businessman watches him, realizing that the actor wasn't just wealthy in money, but in character, in kindness, in the way he treated others. A few minutes later, the flight attendant approaches, carrying a tray with a glass of champagne. She turns to Keanu. Mr. Reeves, this is from the pilot. He's a big fan and wanted to send you a drink. Keanu chuckles softly and shakes his head. That's very kind, but please give it to someone who would enjoy it more. The businessman blinks in shock. This was first-class champagne, a symbol of luxury, and Keanu just gave it away without a second thought. The businessman exhales, staring down at his own half-finished glass. What had he been chasing all these years? His mind drifts back to his younger days, when he had started his career full of hope, ambition, and a desire to create something meaningful. But along the way, he had traded humility for arrogance, passion for power, and kindness for status. And now, sitting beside a man who had everything yet acted like he had nothing to prove, he felt hollow. A moment later, the businessman does something that surprises even himself. He calls over the flight attendant. "Miss, can you do me a favor?" She nods. He pushes his untouched dessert toward her. "Please give this to one of the passengers in economy class. Someone who would enjoy it." The flight attendant smiles, nodding in understanding. "Of course, sir." As she walks away, the businessman exhales deeply. Maybe wealth wasn't about what you kept, but what you gave away. Keanu looks up from his book, a knowing smile on his face. The businessman meets his gaze and, for the first time, understands what true success really means. He had boarded this flight as a man of riches. But now, thanks to Keanu Reeves, he was beginning to learn how to be a man of value.